Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Marshall Adult Community Center. Thank you for braving the weather to come out here today. We sure appreciate it. It's kind of getting moved around a little bit a couple of different times, so we are standing pat and braving the weather today. So thanks for coming out. And big thanks for sure to the Adult Community Center, Barb Lipinski and Heather Radke, and also to Alex and the crew at Studio One for the recording and the audio today. We sure appreciate that. So thanks to everybody involved with what is happening here today. It's a fireside chat with Mayor Bob Byrnes and City Administrator Sharon Hanson. I'm Heath Radke from KMHL. Joyce Stroopman sends her apologies for not being able to be here today, but they're attending a funeral in Iowa today. So I was called to pinch hit, and we're excited to talk about Marshall's past, present, and future today in this fireside chat. So we'll start off with some introductions. Of course, these are two faces of Marshall that you probably know well, and we're going to just kind of get a little background from the two of you to start things off. Mayor Byrnes, if you would, give us just kind of your path in life to Marshall and to government service to this community.
Well, thanks, Heath, and thank you for everyone being here. It's kind of a tough morning again. So yes, my name is Bob Byrnes. I originally grew up in Iowa and then went to school in Wisconsin. And how I ended up in Marshall was when I graduated from college, I actually had a different job offer, and then I got called by University of Minnesota and invited up for an interview, and then went up to a interview on the St. Paul campus, and then the guy I was interviewing with, he was the district director for extension, and he said, okay, I have an opening in Worthington, Marshall, and Benson. He said, which do you think you'd be interested in? So, and at that point I was, grew up in northeastern Iowa, so I really wasn't familiar at all with any of the communities, and so it was probably random that I ended up being placed here in Marshall. So I was invited out, interviewed with the County Extension Committee, and then started on July 1st of 1979. So I'm completing my 40th year then with the University of Minnesota, and I've had a number of different jobs with the university, but always have been here. I started out as the assistant ag agent and worked with farmers, including people like Jack, and when eventually then switched over to more crops, and during the financial crisis of the 80s, then I worked with farm financial management, and about 8 years ago I was appointed as Director of Operations, statewide Director of Operations for Extension. So I have all of Extension in the state as far as their offices. So we have 15 regional offices and then 89 local offices and 1 urban office that I keep track of. So, and then as far as mayor, I ran for the city council in 1986. And served then on the city council for 6 years, and then in 1992 ran for mayor, so I've been mayor since that time. Okay. So that's probably a longer pedigree than what anyone wanted to hear, but that's my history.
And we won't hold Iowa or Wisconsin against you either.
Well, so. They're a good place to be from.
From, right. Yeah. You wised up and came to Minnesota. We're glad for that. Yeah, absolutely. Now, Sharon, if you would kind of give us the same rundown and your background and coming to be city administrator here in Marshall.
In some ways, Bob and I have kind of had somewhat similar backgrounds, and I kind of think back at my career, Bob and I probably did intersect in the last 20-some years, here and there, and I'll explain a little bit why. But I'm originally from Comfrey, Minnesota. It's a really small town, southern Brown County, and grew up on a farm, and always had an interest in farming and environmental type work, and so. My background's actually environmental science and political science, and so my first first job was working on water quality issues. And mostly that work involved meeting with farmers, similar to what Bob and his staff has done in his career, and consulting with them about best management practices and so forth. And so I really started in government when I was 24 and got 18 plus years in county government. And I've done different things, which has been really helpful in this job. I remember when I started for the city of Marshall, one of my first visits was to the wastewater treatment plant. And back in college, one of my internships was actually working at a wastewater treatment plant collecting samples. So it was kind of nice to tell staff that I can relate to them. And in some ways, I've been in their shoes. But so yeah, I just started out in water quality, worked for the first organization I worked for was called Redwood Cottonwood Rivers Control Area, which was an organization that really started because the redwood would flood the cottonwood, so they said, with the two watersheds and the water going back and forth. And then I worked for public health, did some health inspections, again, got to travel southwest Minnesota and visit with a lot of individuals. And then worked for a private company for 5 years doing health and safety consulting, which was really valuable to me too in government sector field, because you kind of know what it's like in the real world, so to speak, and you can get the business perspective instead of just having only the government perspective. So that was helpful to me. And then prior to the city of Marshall, the most recent experience was 13 years with Pipestone County. And there I was the county administrator and worked for the county board and oversaw the staff. And then about a year and a half ago, taking the city of Marshall job. So I've had, just kind of little different steps along the way. They've all been valuable to where I'm at today. I've had a lot of different bosses because I've worked for a governing board, such as the county board, and this council that I'm working for now is it's new and exciting. You get to learn different personalities, and it takes a while to kind of know where your bosses are coming from, and so it's been a really good experience for me. And I will just say, kind of going back to Bob and I intersecting over the last 20-some years, he's really good at what he does. And I can say this because I've had so many different bosses, and he has the ability to set expectations, and he can be pointed at times too. I mean, he can express displeasure and make you try to do things differently and definitely better. So it's been a really good experience directly working for Bob as well, coming to the city of Marshall.
All right, very good. Well, we appreciate the stories from both of you and the path that you've trodden throughout the course of your careers. And we're going to focus on the past, present, and future of Marshall a little bit in our conversation today. And Sharon, as you mentioned, coming in late 2017, the past of Marshall, probably, Bob, leans more to you in talking a little bit about that. It's been wild over the course of, if you sit here today and look back over your 33 years, 6 as a councilman and the rest as the mayor, there's been a lot of change in Marshall over the course of that time, hasn't there?
Well, there has, and certainly Marshall has grown during that time. And I think one of the things that we have tried to stay true to is our comprehensive plan, that Marshall is has a role as a regional center, and that's not that it's more important or less important than any other community, but regional communities in this part of the state are important for employment, they're important for education, they're important for healthcare, they're important for retail. So as I, talk to my friends that are mayors of other communities, the mayor of Worthington and the mayor of Wilmer, and I talk frequently, and I always say to them that, first off, we all deal with a lot of the same issues, and we all really need to be on our game, because if if Wilmer's strong, if Marshall is strong, and if Worthington is strong, well then the region will be okay. But if one of us, has issues with, there's multiple things you could have issues, well then it's going to impact the rest of the region too. So, I really, really think it's really good to work together. And that also includes our smaller communities around the area, because we know that half of the people that work in Marshall don't live in Marshall. So the health of Tracy and the health of Cottonwood and Minneota and Ghent and even beyond that, that's really important for all of us. It's important for those communities, and it's also important for Marshall. So we really like to work together.
That's good to hear. Talk about some of the challenges that you've maybe faced over the course of time. I know you mentioned becoming mayor in '92. Wasn't a year later, and you were dealing with major flooding, and that was quite a challenge for Marshall.
Well, that was probably shouldn't use the word watershed, but that was kind of a watershed year. In terms of that was '93 was the first year I was mayor, and we had. You all remember this. I mean, we had a flood on Mother's Day, we had a flood on Father's Day, and we had a flood on 4th of July. So and that really exposed a lot of vulnerability that we as a community had at that time. Previous to that, in the 80s, there was drought, it was dry. There wasn't a lot of focus on stormwater management or river flooding control, even though that issue had been around for a long time. And we all know, I'll go kind of fast on this because we can talk hours on flood control, but we all know that in the early 1960s, the diversion channel was constructed, and then in 1969 there was a flood, and it was really evident that the diversion channel wasn't working as it was intended. The water would leave the river before it got to the diversion structure west of town, and it would enter the city from the other end, from the north side. So there needed to be a correction, and that was actually authorized by Congress in the mid-1970s, I believe 1974 to 1976, but it was never funded. And then, of course, in the 80s, it was dry. There wasn't a lot of focus. There was also, a fair amount of controversy with this because the Redwood River, the overflow goes to the Cottonwood watershed by where now Victory Park is. With that, many of us remember that as Wayside Park. That's where the overflow happens. So if water leaves the river there and goes south of Highway 23, that's the Cottonwood watershed. So, the whole issue was how can this be constructed in a way that doesn't, it was true to where water should stay and where is that natural overflow. And that was studied by the Corps of Engineers, and that was part of the authorization of the project in the mid-70s. And as I said, it wasn't funded. And then following the '93 floods, and we really became serious about this. We worked with our congressional delegation because it needed to be federally funded. I worked with Senator Rod Graham, Senator Paul Wellstone, Representative David Mengy. I made 13 trips out to Washington. I testified before a congressional committee, and ultimately it was funded. So that brings us to today, where we have concerns today about the amount of water that we have on the landscape, and what happens if it all melts in a hurry. So we know that there's really two issues that we have with spring melt flooding. One is the river, and so we are fairly well protected. We have an emergency plan. We're quite comfortable with that plan. We watch it. We have contingencies, if it would get extremely high. Right now, the National Weather Service has this identified as a greater than 50% chance of river flooding. That means that it gets above 14 feet on the river gauge. We're actually protected up to right around 18 feet. So we can be in flood stage, but we're still protected. I guess that's the point. And our other issue that we had in '93 was the neighborhood flooding. The water wasn't from the river, but it was water that just was in neighborhoods. In that case, it was heavy rains. In this case, it might be, rapid melt. And so we've had major investments, major improvements to our stormwater management system since that time, including the Ditch 62 project, including stormwater impoundment, such as the big pond north of the college, as well as other ponds around the city. So we are in, it took a big investment, but we are in a much better shape in terms of managing what your original question is, what was the major issue that we faced? We're in much better case right now than we were in '93. Do you want to add anything to that?
I think you did a pretty good job explaining where we're at, and definitely we're kind of monitoring the current status with all the moisture that's out there, and we probably discuss the weather as well as you do almost every day, but how it will impact the river and flooding and so forth. And we know last year too, we had some localized flooding, and in that case, what our wastewater supervisor, Bob Van Moore, does is we actually map it out, look at those areas, and when we do infrastructure projects, street reconstruction and so forth, we're going to take a hard look at those areas that have been impacted. We really don't want to have residents have flooded basements. Some of them did have sewage backup and so forth, and so it's something that's always on the forefront of our discussions here in the city of Marshall.
Okay, very good. Bob, are there any other moments of challenge over the course of your mayoralship that you can think of that you'd like to highlight or talk a little bit about?
Well, I would just say, one of the challenges that we have is having good staff. So I've been, blessed to have city administrators that are truly competent. And so since I started, we've had, I believe, 5 city administrators during that time. So, and it makes my job a lot easier if there's a city administrator that is truly competent, hardworking, and trusted, and that's really what we have with Sharon. We've had there's some natural succession that happens with all of our staff. We've gone through a time in the past couple of years where we've had some employees that have reached the point in their career where they're going to retire or have retired. So, that happened with our community services director, Harry Wylage, a couple of years ago. It happened with our director of public safety, Rob Yant. So it happened with our fire chief, Mark Clay. So when all of us retire, it always creates a void, but there's been good people that have stepped into that, and that, in our case, Scott Vandermillen, taking the place of Harry Wylage, Jim Marshall taking the place of Rob Yant, and Quentin Brunswell taking the place of Mark Clay. While they're not the same person, they bring different strengths and talents to our, so managing their staff is really important in the community.
Yeah, that's for sure. It's been quite a year of, maybe a little more than a year when you mentioned Harry, of change for the city of Marshall, but that brings new ideas, like you said, and new direction perhaps, and a change in thought process. So it'll be interesting to see going forward how that progresses. You talk about challenges. Talk about, over the course of your time as mayor, some of the highlights that you really see. I'm sure the completion of the flooding project and retaining good staff are parts of those, but are there others that you could talk on too?
Yeah, I think both of those are important. I think our comprehensive planning of the city, and we've all been to different communities, and you wonder about why is this here, or why is that there, and why was if there's properties that look like they don't belong, we see that in some communities as you travel around. You don't really see that in Marshall. Marshall is a well-planned community. We have followed a comprehensive plan that has residential is where residential goes, and industrial is on, the north side of the community, and the airport is on the west. So it is a well-planned community. So I think that's good. And of course, I always say, if we fly over communities, they pretty much all, communities look the same from the air, but when you really get down to it, I mean, it's really the people in the community, and one of the real strengths of Southwest Minnesota communities is the people in the communities that are, willing to, be an active part of the community, including what we see here today, but also being involved in the community. We have a very active community. We have over 100 people that volunteer to serve on different boards and commissions of the city, and that's a true volunteer, and that's what, they do a lot of good work that really helps the council.
You bet. As we talked about with the transition of some of those major positions in the city, and some that don't get publicity so much in offices and different parts of city government, as that transition takes place, and it has over the course of these couple of years, tell us about that change and what you're seeing from your seat and from your seat.
Well, I think our goal is that as we have people leave employment with the city, retirement or relocation or whatever, we do want to be the kind of the employer of choice, because we have high quality, very dedicated city employees, and we want to maintain that. So that means, we have to pay attention to, what we're paying and what our benefits are, and also what the quality of the work environment are, because we really do have good employees. This past week I sent out a note to our staff, because we've been through a time when there's, I don't need to tell anybody here, I mean, it snows every other day, and it's like constant with, since about January 18th that, but that our staff has really done, I think, a good job, and they come under some pressure, and it's kind of natural that there's, folks that, have advice like, wasn't it done this way, or why isn't it done that way? But we really have some very dedicated staff, and that's not only the frontline people like Sharon and who does a good job, or our, plow drivers, but it's also those people that are in support roles, whether it's in finance or whether it's other things that aren't as visible, but is really important for the functioning of the city. We have, Sharon, was it 99 or 100 full-time employees in the city of Marshall. When I was elected mayor in 1992, we had 84. So the community has grown a lot since then, but we haven't had a similar growth in city employees, and that means that people are working efficiently, we're using technology, we have good equipment, and they're serving our citizens, I think, quite well.
Well, I think staff and who you have on your team is probably one of the most important things for our organization. My first year, we did some restructure with staff. Some of it was a result of retirement or changes that we've made. And those have been extremely important for the city of Marshall, especially, going into 2018. The one, or maybe a few points on your staff is that you're always going to be looking or striving for continual improvement. I mean, one area that I think about is the council made some changes with the building inspection department, and I think it's better. I think that the feeling out in the community by our contractors and residents is that as we've improved in that area. But I also know that you need to keep working at it. You can't rest. And so that's something that, I'm going to work with the staff on to make sure that we continue to keep that good feeling out there and good service out there, especially in that area. The other thing too is, I have high expectations for myself, and that means I have high expectations for staff. But I also know that if you if you think they're going to do the job the way you would do it, you're going to be continually disappointed. It's very rare where an employee will do it the way you want them to do it. You have to give them a little bit of freedom to be able to do what they do, and it increases productivity. And so I think even for residents, you know, to have comments come back, whether it be, you know, certain services and so forth, we do kind of keep in mind that, you know, keeping expectations in check. I will say, and I mentioned this to others too, even the weather we've had, because I do monitor feedback on our Facebook and social media posts. I think the community has been extremely positive, really supportive of the work we're doing. But again, we know that we got to keep it up and not rest and do the best that we can. So.
For those of you here, on your table you'll find some blank sheets of paper and some pens if you'd like to ask any questions of the mayor and city administrator. Heather and Barb will come around shortly and collect those, and they'll pick a couple that we can answer at the end of the program. So feel free to do that as we go along. And as we do move forward, the future of Marshall is certainly something that I know that you deal with on a day-to-day basis, trying to figure out the direction of the community, sticking to that original plan and kind of honing it as time goes on. Talk about what kind of things you're looking at right now to better the city of Marshall as we move forward.
Well, I'll start with a couple of things, and then Sharon, you can chime in or add to it or correct anything I might have said improperly. But I think one of the things that we'll focus on in the coming years is really fine-tuning our strategic plan, which is our comprehensive planning document, because you know that's really a living document, and you know the community is changing. I think really one of our focuses is going to be on as our economy is changing, our business industry community is changing. We had the sale of Schwann's that was finalized earlier this week to CJ Enterprises, a Korean-based company, which we are quite hopeful that will continue to be a positive thing for the community. Both Sharon and I have been in contact with Schwann's, and of course the Schwann's Home Service will be a separate entity that will also be based in Marshall. So it's really our hope that that through this transition that we end up with two corporate offices. One is CJ North America of Schwann's, and the other is Schwann's Home Service that will be based in Marshall. But that's going to take some work, some convincing, and you know, and ultimately at the end of the day, you know, large corporate businesses make decisions that aren't necessarily, you know, be locally based decisions. So we have to really be sure that we're positioned well in terms of the assets that we have. And we know that in that communication, one of the big assets that we have is our workforce. That we have a quality workforce, they're a hardworking workforce. And I know from my work that I'm able to hire, you know, quality staff that probably in the metropolitan area may not be available because there's so many more demands. But we have a lot of talented people that are here because they're here. They're here because either they grew up in this area or they have a spouse in this area that has a job or farms or whatever. So there's a lot of really talented workforce, and that's really one of our assets. So that's one of the things that we have to be sure that we communicate to any industry that is looking to stay or expand or relocate to Marshall. And then there's the other things like water, and we do have a adequate water supply. We'll have some additional investment in improving our water quality in the future, but we need to have adequate natural resources in terms of water. We need to be able to treat the wastewater properly. We need to have adequate electricity and natural gas and all those things. We need to be positioned well. And, you know, just conclude with, you know, we have opportunities where we've also kind of positioned ourselves that we have shovel-ready land, and that's important. So we have the Commerce Industrial Park that will be available, you know, and maybe that will be for True Shrimp will occupy that, or maybe not. Maybe it'll be something else. But we're trying to really put the pieces in place so that as corporate decisions are made, that they can make decisions that are favorable for Marshall. Sharon?
I may overlap here a little bit, but that's okay. That means we're on kind of the similar lines of thinking. But Bob has mentioned the comprehensive plan document several times this morning. That document is 1996, so it's over 20 years old. Typically, those plans are a 20-year document, so we're not too far off, but definitely that's something we want to look at, updating and ensuring that we're growing the city in a efficient and productive and economic development-wise positive way. The other plan that we really want to look at too this year is a strategic plan for city and city operations, and we'll include some of our community boards as well in that discussion. But I think it's really important to have listed out what the vision for the city is and what the goals are. I think a lot about economic development for the city of Marshall. I think that has to be number one goal. We need to increase our tax capacity so we can keep our tax rate low, even though when we compare it with other communities similar size, and of course, unfortunately for some of the smaller communities, their tax rate is far, far higher. We want to make sure that we keep that as level as we possibly can. We know in economic development, kind of spinning off a little bit on the building inspection department, it's how people feel. And we want a positive feeling out there. It's easy to get down, but you got to stay up. And one of the things that the city is going to work on this year is better marketing and communication about the city. When I look at past documents promoting the city, there was a core group of business people in the city of Marshall that did push for economic development. We didn't always have an economic development director for the city of Marshall. That really came later on and cities got more involved. It was driven by business. When we look at some of the businesses that are in town and we look at history, we also know that most of the time, if not all the time, consumers drive the business in the city of Marshall, and some come and some go. And so we want to look into the future of how what some positive steps are in that particular direction. Bob mentioned water and wastewater and electricity, and those are major infrastructure improvements for the city of Marshall. They cost a lot of money, and obviously you may know that as well. We typically try to pay for those particular projects with the user fees that all of you pay, whether it be the sewer rates or the electricity fees or the water usage fee. We know that we need to make upgrades in our wastewater treatment plant, our water treatment plant as well. It's important not only for our consumers of those particular utilities, but it's really important for economic development. I visited yesterday with the City of Laverne administrator who came into town, and we showed him different areas. And when we talked about rural areas of both of our counties where the tax rate's really low and there's a lot of opportunity, you need so much in terms of gas supply, electricity, water, and where are you going to treat this waste? You need a community like Marshall and like Laverne, who's actually doing a lot of improvements themselves to try to attract business down there. So those particular projects really go all in line with this. I do want to mention a little topic too on City Hall. I think a couple other times I've spoken to this group. I've mentioned the need to look at renovation of City Hall, and that's because it's a 1964 building. There's been minimal work done on that since 1964, and that's not discrediting any past administration or any past councils. That's what most government entities, and maybe personally what we do, we get by, and it saves us money. Well, now the bill is due, and we really need to look at improving our current location. The council has made a directive that they want to stay downtown. That's really important to the city, is importance of Main Street and redevelopment. We would like to see the hotel that's been abandoned for a long time. We'd like to see that redeveloped. We're working with a private developer to see if we can get enough financial incentives for him to be able to put a business on the first floor and maybe develop the second and third floors as well. So there's just a lot of things kind of going on. It's really fun. It's great to work with the council on it and the staff. And I could go on, but I don't want to take up too much time. So
I would just add to that. Well, let me add a couple things. Sharon is good at covering a lot of details. You can see she has actually brought notes here, and she has an outline. And I
didn't want to forget anything. So.
Right. So that's good. Just a bit about our city hall building, our municipal building. Many of you remember that that at one time also housed the fire department, and they've moved in the latter half of the 1970s, and it also housed our police department, and that moved when the Joint Law Enforcement Center was constructed. And so it's had a number of different uses, and there's parts of that building because of those previous uses that are unusable. So for instance, the garage floor, because of the traffic that came in with police vehicles and fire trucks in the winter, that has degraded the floor. So that floor underneath the basement area, parts of that we can't use because the concrete is like flaking off and it's dangerous. So so we do have some rehabilitation that is needed on that building. I would say though that the core of the building, the envelope of the building is sound. It's just that it needs to be renovated, and then as part of that renovation, kind of be functional so that the community can access the things that they frequently need to access. That probably we would move our city council meetings back down to the city hall building, that we would have the technology that's necessary and the accessibility. And also, Sharon mentioned that the council did make the decision to stay in the current location. There was some argument that some may have had, like, well, wouldn't it be less expensive to go on the outskirts of town? But that really wouldn't have helped the community or helped the central business district.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things that's been a hot topic in town. A couple of other things as we look at some of the questions that have come from the audience today.
Let me just add
one
other thing on that. It's our intent, of course that will be a spending project, it's our intent to do that without borrowing. So we're strategizing, and and Sharon's doing a lot of work on how that's going to happen.
Okay.
So go ahead.
Yep, absolutely. You talked about expanding the tax base. You mentioned True Shrimp. One of the questions that comes from the audience today is there any movement on that? Are there any plans that are in the works or that have been made by that company in the city?
Well, I think, and I'll start on that, and you can continue on that. True Shrimp is in the formative stages. They, the parent company is Relco, which is corporate headquarters is Marshall. They looked at Laverne. They ran into some regulatory issues. They are now looking at Madison, South Dakota. But we have maintained kind of good communication with them so that they know where we're at in terms of the water quality, the water capacity, the shovel-ready sites that we have. So we're positioned, if not, for a future expansion. And maybe it will be not the first harbor that they are building. It might be something else. But we are positioned that when they make that corporate decision, that we'll be a player in that decision.
Yeah, we, the Economic Development Director, Tara Onken, and I meet with Brian Knockmoose from Relco True Shrimp monthly. So we have a good communication line directly to them. We actually had a larger group meeting with the mayor and other staff in Ballatin about 2 months ago, and that was really good. And we talked about the commercial commerce park that we have and the land that we have available. And so some of it is a continual education with Ralco, True Shrimp, and the city of Marshall of needs and what we have and what we can offer. And I think, you know, I know that there's a number of local investors in Ralco and True Shrimp, and they're definitely whispering in True Shrimp's ears about the potential of Marshall and the advantages of putting something in Marshall. In addition, we have maybe some spin-off work that could be done if the True Shrimp production gets going, and we know of a company here in Marshall that's assisting with their development of their process currently in Balaton and wherever they end up, and hopefully that's in Marshall. And so we think there'll be some benefit to Marshall from that too. And I do know that, you know, that company is also giving some suggestions to True Shrimp and Ralco. So they've learned a lot in Balaton. They've grown and changed some processes because of what they've learned in Balaton. So kind of reiterating what Bob said earlier, it's new. It's still a challenge for them as well. And yeah, it's important to us, and we definitely are talking to them on a regular basis.
Okay, very good. Another of the questions that comes concerns just the retail community here in Marshall. Since you took the spot as mayor and even as a councilman and being here part of the community before that, the retail climate has changed considerably from mom and pop stores to big box retailers, and trying to find how that all kind of fits together in a community like Marshall has been challenging and rewarding in both sides. Talk a little bit about that and where we stand today with places like the announced Hobby Lobby that will be coming to town.
Sure. I'll talk a little bit about retail, and you can talk about Hobby Lobby and perhaps other things. But you're absolutely right, Heath. The retail shopping environment is changing. There's online shopping, and you know, and that's changing. So but as you look at Marshall, you know, we receive data from the Department of Revenue on sales tax receipts, and in fact, we have a local option sales tax that supported the construction of the Red Baron Arena and the Merit Center. And those sales tax receipts actually are ahead of projections, because as they do the analysis for Marshall, and they do a measurement called the pull factor, which right now Marshall is at 1.7 or 1.8, whereas 1 would be what you would typically expect from the population of the community and the region. You know, if those people were buying in the community, then that pull factor would be 1. Ours is about 1.7, which is one of the highest in greater Minnesota. I think there's maybe 2 that are higher than us. I mean, it's higher than Wilmer, it's higher than Alexandria. So really what that means at 1.7 is that our retail activity is 70% higher than what you would normally expect for the population of the city of Marshall. And I think that makes sense. You know, Marshall is a place where people do come, and it might be to shop in the big box stores, or it might be to stop in some of the more boutique stores that are on 3rd Street or other places downtown. But people are coming to Marshall. And that's really, I think, a function of our geography. I talked to the mayor of Worthington, and they don't have that, but then they're that much closer to Sioux Falls. So we're that much farther away from some of the major retail activities. That works in our benefit. So yes, retail is changing, but surprisingly, retail total activity is stronger than what you would normally expect in Marshall.
Right. There was a study recently completed by the University of Minnesota that actually for Marshall we've seen a net gain in retail, not a net loss. And they compared it with other communities, not only just surrounding Marshall, but throughout the state of Minnesota and towns similar to the size of Marshall. So I think that can be attributed actually maybe going back to some of the mom and pops again and what we like to call boutiques. I remark that if you go down 3rd Street and the recent business development there, it's kind of the new mall, I would say, and the new way of shopping for consumers. More of a personalized shopping than you would get at a larger retail. Now, the larger retail is still really important to us. Obviously, we've been tracking ShopGo and seeing what's occurring out there with that. We are really excited to have Hobby Lobby come to the city of Marshall, which will be located in the former Kmart space, co-located with Ashley Furniture. The one, it's taken a lot longer than we thought it was going to take, and it's unfortunate that it could have been a little bit sooner. But sometimes business moves at a slower pace as well. Sometimes it's not just government, and so we're really excited to kind of see that development happen. And there'll be other challenges going forward. You know, the mall is still really important to us to see what's going to happen with that. And I know that owner has I think made some contact with government on certain things that he's dealing with, but that'll be really important to us in the future as well.
So one of the retail activities that we conduct is Tallgrass Liquor. And there's a whole lot of history about why cities have liquor stores, and really goes back to control, but it also has to do with revenue. And as I think everyone knows, we built a new store, and when we were doing the site selection for that, we deliberately selected a location that was located where retail traffic was coming from out of the community. So, and it's been highly successful. It's a very profitable store, and we transfer between $250,000 and $300,000 to our general fund every single year. That's over and above what the profits that remain with our liquor store. So that has really helped with controlling our property taxes.
Okay. Let's talk about Southwest Minnesota State University and the connection between the city of Marshall and the university as they continue to kind of wonder about funding and try to increase enrollment. What kind of communication and, I guess, collaboration go on between the city and the university?
So we have enjoyed a really good partnership with Southwest Minnesota State University, and I know I had said this earlier this week to Provost Dwight Watson, is that, where else in the world would you find a four-year university where the city and the school district and the university all partner on a lot of things, including cable access television that is right now, the studio is out at SMSU. So there is good partnerships. You mentioned funding for higher education, and funding has been for the last 25 years for higher education has been a challenge. It's been on, the investment in higher education has really shifted to tuition that students and families pay, and that contributes to student debt. And I don't think anybody thinks that is healthy, but that's because the state investment has gone down over time, and I think politically, there needs to be some hard decisions that are made to really seriously address the funding for higher education. And so that directly impacts SMSU as part of the Minnesota state system. The role of SMSU in the community is really important. They're a great employer. But they also offer a lot more than just employment to the region and to the community, and we all know that. So that's why it's important that SMSU is healthy. They're going through transition of their leadership. President Connie Gores, as she retires on June 30th, she's been a wonderful president and a great partner. We'll have someone new. We don't know who that will be, but we're hopeful that that new president will value the community connections just as Dr. Gores has.
I think one of the challenges for Southwest State University has been the surrounding region and the decline of population in the region. And if you look at population projections for Southwest, most of the counties, if not all, are projected to lose population. That's hurt their enrollment. They know they have to seek out other ways to increase that enrollment. My understanding is the freshman class was up for SMSU for this past academic school year, so they're making strides in that. Let me just add on the population projections. There's only 2 communities in Lyon County that are currently gaining population, and that's Marshall and Lind. And Lind is likely a population growth because their boundaries expanded quite a bit along the Redwood River. Looking back in the 80s, the Lyon County lost population, but the city of Marshall did not. And so we think that we are a positive attribute for SMSU, and hopefully we can help with that. One other key collaboration or factor that we think we can help SMSU with is the quality of life here in Marshall. I think for a majority of their students, if not all, they may choose SMSU because of safety factors, the size of the community, and the amenities that we offer. Although we're always looking at ways to increase amenities here, it's important to us and the students. We don't necessarily want them always going home on the weekend. We want them to stay here in the city of Marshall. And so I think those are some areas where we could collaborate and work together, and hear feedback from students on kind of what they'd like to see in the community. That's going to be important to us.
So that, let me just add to that. Sharon talked about population that's measured by the annual census. So April 1st of 2020 will be the next census, and it's really, really important that we have an accurate count, and that means that students at SMSU that are there need to participate in the census, and we need to really work hard to be sure that they understand that they're not counted where mom and dad live in St. James. They're counted here because this is where they live. Similar, for folks that might go to, Arizona for the winter. Well, they're residents of Marshall. They need to participate in the census in Marshall. I know last time there was kind of a campaign in some of the snowbird type states to count there, and we don't want that. So, and we also, so we really need active, full participation in the census, because that's really what determines a lot of things, including, some decisions that are made by employers and retail activities. So, and that also includes, our hard to count population, and that might be our immigrant population, new people to the community. We really need to work hard to be sure that there's full participation in the census.
One final question from the audience today. We would be remiss if we didn't talk about the snow, of course. How does the city go about preparing for a year like this budgetarily? And then as far as parking concerns and things like that, are there anything along that line that you've been made aware of or that you're working to better?
So let me say one thing. I mean, there's things that we can prepare for, and there's things that we have to deal with that you hadn't necessarily anticipated. And since January 18th, we have had a record amount of snow, and that's also been accompanied by a lower than normal temperature. We haven't had any melt. Our average, temperature has been right in the 12-degree stage. If we look at all that, which is 4.5 degrees below our normal for the period of time. So, that's not something that you normally anticipate. We normally anticipate you receive 7 inches of snow in the month of February, not 39 inches of snow. So it is a challenge, but we do have, good equipment, although it's hard on equipment to run it every day. We did add a 4th residential crew to do our residential streets, so that has speeded things up a bit. But yes, it has been a challenge. And we do have a budget for it, but that budget is, Sharon, I think it's safe to say it's over budget. So we'll have to.
It was definitely over budget in 2018. And, you know, we had flooding as well, so we had a lot of work on our streets department, and helping with that, it was like, I think, $170,000 over budget. And this is why we don't like to say the word cushion, but you make a guess on what you think you're going to expend in the following year, and it's an educated guess. But it's not a checkbook where you reconcile it every month, and it's a plan of what you think you're going to spend. And so luckily we had other departments that underspent as far as expenses. So overall our general fund budget for 2018 ended up where it needed to be. I've gotten a lot of questions already about where we're at with our budget. We've got a large remainder of the year left. We really have to kind of see how October, November, and December is going to be. And maybe I shouldn't skip over April, because April last year was really difficult for us too. And I don't want to contradict the mayor, but I do want to talk a little bit about equipment. Some of the reasons we went over budget was for equipment repairs in 2018. We need better equipment. It's not bad. We get by again. But we have a road grader that's really due for replacement. We're renting another one to make it possible for the fourth crew, and that's great. We have a private-public partnership, but we really need an investment in equipment, and it could be better, in my opinion. And hopefully we can get to that point. I don't know what the cost for a road grader is anymore. It's really expensive, and so those are hard decisions for the council. And you know, when it's working and you're getting by, you kind of want to kind of continue on that path, but eventually it catches up with you, and it could be paying for costly repairs, or we could be down. I know about 2 weeks ago, we could have done a lot more snow blowing than we did until now. Our blower was broke down. We had to wait for a part, and it's an aged snow blower, and so productivity goes down, and we're actually wasting your tax dollars when we don't have the right equipment. So we do the best we can. Like I said, hopefully we have enough in the budget for 2019 to cover it. We did in 2018 when we looked at the other areas, but at the end of the day, we're going to do what we need to do because it's what we're here for. So.
I think the other part of your question was on parking restrictions,
Yeah.
and we have implemented parking restrictions. Just because of the streets are getting narrower, and we have to get the vehicles off that are parked on the streets off the streets so that they can be widened. You know, when you have one snow, you can plow it curb to curb. But after like the 15th snow, you get farther and farther away from that curb. So eventually you got to widen it out. And when you got cars that you're going around, it just, well, we all know that. I mean, it narrows up the streets, and so.
All right. Here at the Marshall Adult Community Center, they talk about a lot about legacy. And as Marshall approaches its sesquicentennial, 150 years in 2022, I believe, just talk about the legacy of Marshall over its first 150 and what you are doing and hope to do to position it for another strong 150 years.
Well, Heath, that actually is a hard question, and it's a difficult question to answer in a short period of time. But I would hope that the legacy is that Marshall is a regional community that serves Southwest Minnesota and serves in terms of healthcare, which we haven't talked about healthcare, but Marshall is a major player in healthcare for the region, obviously, but a major factor for the region in employment. Since Marshall's formation, Marshall has been a community that's really been about jobs. And our focus really needs to be about continued economic development so that there are jobs in the community. We're not a resort community. We're not a community that is a bedroom community to a metropolitan area. We're a regional center community that is really focused on jobs, and that's been the way that it has been well before any of our time, when the the old story about the Catholic Church was located in Marshall because Protestant businessmen lobbied the bishop because they wanted a Catholic Church here so that people would move here to be employees in the community. And I think we continue to have that. We'll have continued changes in population in the community, and which is good if we're going to have a workforce in the community. So I think if we look at our legacy, it'll be that Marshall is that regional center in Southwest Minnesota for all the things I mentioned: employment, education, healthcare, and retail.
How about from the standpoint of, you're talking government and what the city can do, individual community members and members that are business owners, what kind of things can they do to help that legacy continue?
You want to start on that?
Keep communicating with us and tell us what you see, tell us what you hear. I think that's so important. I know that with the snowfall, we've gotten some emails from community members, and again, mostly those have been positive or giving suggestions. One of the individuals said, communication is key. I just want you to make aware of a potential safety issue on this corner. I know that when there was construction on Saratoga, we had an individual recommend a four-way stop. I don't know if we would have done it unless we gotten feedback from the citizen who made the idea. Just this last week, we had a question about how we handle our garbage at Red Baron, and it seemed a little kind of out of place, and it eventually was. But I always say that we can only get better if we hear from you, and I think for us that's the most important. And for my staff or myself, I think one of the things that I try to instill is be approachable and communicate in return, and have conversations with individuals as much as you can. I think that's really important for us.
As you look at the legacy that you're leaving as individuals, as the city administrator in Marshall and as the mayor of the city, what kind of things do you hope to be remembered for?
Well, hopefully good things. No, I mean, I think all of us have probably the same goal, is that, we try to do the right thing. And if we're remembered for doing the right thing, that's the right thing.
Yeah,
Sharon?
I just go back to being approachable, always telling the truth, even when it isn't going to be well received. Development of trust is really important. And I think that speaks well for any individual if you can go about your business with that type of thinking.
All right, very good. Well, we certainly want to thank both of you for taking some time to come out here today. It's been fun to visit with you and get your thoughts on this community, past, present, and future. And we really look forward to moving forward as the city of Marshall is concerned. Just a reminder that coming up on the 2019 State of the City Address, it'll be at the Conference Center at SMSU from 11:30 until 1 o'clock coming up next Wednesday, March the 13th. So if you're interested in that, it's being put on by the Marshall Chamber. It is a new luncheon event, so the cost is $20 for chamber members and $25 for non-members. If you'd like to participate in that, we invite you out to Southwest Minnesota State University in the Conference Center. Mayor Byrnes and Administrator Hanson will both be taking part in that State of the City Address for 2019. So we again want to thank Heather and Barb here at the Marshall Adult Community Center, Alex and Ryan here at the Studio One, and for all of you coming out, we appreciate it, and thank you for your time today.